Now, welcome along. So we have knockout rugby this weekend, last 16 of the Champions Cup, where this tournament starts to deliver in a big way, unless, of course, you're Saracens, but we'll come to that. Now, I'm sure Ron O'Gara has been wondering when this day would come as head coach against Munster. It comes this Saturday at a low ebb for La Rochelle, as we know. That's 5:30 in La Rochelle. That game is hot on the heels of Leinster Harlequins at 3. Keane Tracy reporting, I saw attendance is going to hit 60,000 at Croke Park, which is just, extraordinary in so many ways. If you want to make a full day of it on Saturday, by the way, then just after the game at La Rochelle, 8 o'clock, Connacht will host Cardiff in the last 16 of the Challenge Cup. And then on Sunday, we should mention, it's going to be tricky for them, 12:30. They're in the Champions Cup knockout stages. Ulster snuck through courtesy of just a single win in the group, but they are paying the price for a low seeding. They're away to Bordeaux, who beat them well in the group stages. So Ulster away to Bordeaux, 12:30 on Sunday. So 4 provinces in action in knockout European rugby. Happy to say Rory O'Connor is here in studio. Rud, good to have you in.
Thanks, welcome back.
And Ian Madigan, hello to you. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Joe. Yeah, great to be back on. Congratulations on your new Baba.
Thanks. I don't know what else to say. Thanks. It's all going well. Our rugby coverage is brought to you by Energia, as you know, and Energia's Half a Fan campaign is calling on Irish rugby fans to bring their great support to the women's team in this year's Six Nations. If you love Irish rugby, you can't be half a fan. Their next home game at the tournament is in Cork. They take on England April 12th. And that is, in fairness to them, hot off the heels of their best Six Nations performance in years. Very, very long time. So, kind of recalibrating a bit. Six Nations has fully kind of blended away into the background. There was a kind of Lions fervour for a week or so. Andy Farrell naming his coaching ticket. Simon Easterby, what's happening about Ireland? And then there was McHale Park in particular. And now here's Europe.
Yeah.
That's about where we are.
Yeah, it's good to have it back, isn't it? Especially with this fixture in La Rochelle. I'm doing the double because La Rochelle and Bordeaux are just down the road from each other. So it's a nice trip to have at this time of year. And I think they've set up a fan zone for all the Munster fans going over in the port in La Rochelle. So there's a real sense of an old-fashioned movement of Munster fans it's not quite the south of France, to the west of France this time, and a fixture we can really hang our hat on. I know the crowd that you mentioned at Croke Park will make Leinster Harlequins. I think Harlequins may make Leinster Harlequins as well, because we saw Ireland hurt in the wide channels a little bit in Six Nations, and Harlequins play fast. I interviewed Tadhg Furlong last weekend, and he said when we asked him what sticks out about Harlequins, they like to play and they play fast. So it'll be a real challenge for the Jack Nienauer defence, and it kind of frames the rest of the season now. It's my favourite part of the season. The intensity of Six Nations lifts, and we're into these good weather, big knockout rugby games. The eternal question hanging over Leinster, Munster going to France. It's great.
Yeah, sign me up. Let's start with Munster, La Rochelle, but get there via Jack Crowley and his situation. Look, there's kind of a long-standing tradition of at times tetchy or kind of prolonged negotiations with the IRFU, and they can need a prod. And we've seen Rog go to Miami, and we've seen O'Driscoll have lunch at Biarritz and end up on the pitch with the president. And, there was kind of, it felt like a playfulness, or like a winking and like, come on, boys. Then the Sexton one ratcheted it up, and it's not always boy who cries wolf. And so that's kind of the backdrop for Crowley. We haven't had many of these, God, there's a big offer, everyone knows about it, what's he going to do situations. At the weekend, Dean Costello gave the impression that we were very, very close. He said they're confident. And then Donald Lenihan on against the head. And, I kind of take Lenihan, given his Cork-Con connection and Crowley's Cork-Con connection, as a fairly informed source. So he said on against the head, Ian Costello spoke about this, and it was in all the Sunday papers, that a deal to stay was done, or certainly close to being done. But as far as I'm aware, that's not the case. There has been a sort of a derisory extra few bob thrown into the can, which I don't think reflects Jack Crowley's worth. What's your understanding of where we are?
My understanding is that it's if it's not done, it's close to being done. He's actually doing media today. He's doing a call for one of his sponsors at 12 o'clock today. So by the time this is out, there may even be more updates. But okay. Certainly the IRFU were very confident that he will stay, that they were never going to match what Leicester had on the table, but they felt that the lure of the green jersey, of playing for Munster, I don't think Leicester Tigers, it's very financially attractive, but it's not an attractive club right now. We don't know who their head coach are going to be next year. They and that's a big thing for a 10. You know, you could sign for them and they bring in someone completely who's not aligned to you. Although I think Crowley's a versatile enough player that he can get on board. I thought it was a timely visit from Clayton McMillan last week, the new Munster coach for next season, who used the bye week for the Chiefs to fly around the world to meet the management and going to be a fly on the wall. And I think that would have sent I'm sure, I don't know, did he meet Crowley directly? They're saying he didn't really meet with players that much, but I wonder, did he pull him aside and say, look, you're my guy? Because I'd say if Craig McMillan is looking at it going, you need, like, I've signed up for 3 years, he's your best player, you can't let him go. You know, it's not really conscionable to, for a whole lot of reasons. The whole thing is like, you can't let this guy go. And it would be disappointing if they lowballed him again. It really would, because I know Sam Prendergast has just signed a Leinster contract, but there's an argument for putting both him and Crowley on national deals and backing them and saying, we are back, you know, you are our two guys for the next 3 or 4 years, or even longer. Even, you know, we'll back, you know, even if you're not starting, you're still a key part of what we're doing here with Ireland. We want Munster to be strong, and for Munster to be strong, they need Jack Crowley and Craig Casey and players that they've produced themselves to do it. And like the RFU, since Sexton, really very few players have left, and we've wanted them on the line, but you know, they've done a very good job of keeping most of the players they wanted to keep. But you know, they've been hit with a bit of a curveball by Leicester making a marquee player offer, but the financials are not everything. And I think for Crowley at the stage of the career he's at, I can't see him going. And my understanding is that it's very close to being done, and it may even be done
by the time this goes out. Yeah. To be fair, I never saw him going. The
No.
650 from Leicester is obviously very, very tempting. At the same time, it's not completely life-changing in a way that if you're getting 350 plus endorsements at home, it's not going to change your life in 20 years' time necessarily, and you're giving up Irish rugby. I never thought he was going to give up the green jersey. It's more actually, Ian, how's he going to feel at the end of this? You know, that's maybe the more interesting position. So you're the RFU. So is it Munster or the RFU or both? Okay. Will they, like, RFU will give a little bit, Munster give a little bit, or is it they decide on it?
In the last couple of years, they developed this kind of in-between system. It's called player of national interest, or a pony deal. Okay. So Munster will say it's a 300,000 a year contract. Munster will probably pay 200,000, and RFU will top that up by 100, something along those lines. We don't have clarity on how many pony deals there are, but I imagine Prendergast is on one. Players like maybe Ryan Baird, players who are in the 23 but aren't on national deals. James Lowe is not on a national deal, but I'd imagine he's on a very substantial pony deal. So players like that who are not on national deals, and Crowley is already on one, and I'd imagine he's on an improved pony, but it's nowhere near it's 750 when you calculate the sterling into euro.
Okay. But then, you know, all sorts of considerations. I'm sure as agent, and Ian, you can speak to this, you'll be thinking, well, look, there's the tax incentive for staying in Ireland too. So maybe these things aren't as far apart as we would think. But you've possibly been in this position, I'm sure, Ian, or you've played with players who are in this position. There are all sorts of considerations. Like even from an IRFU Munster point of view, maybe you do lowball them. And good for you, you know, because you know deep down in the privacy of your conversations, you're saying, this guy's not giving up an Irish career. He's just not. So just offer him his 300 and send him on his way and let him sulk for a few weeks, and that's that. For me, that's not winning either, because you've kind of alienated a key player in a key position, and you may think you've won as an organisation, but you haven't necessarily. So there are various angles to this.
Yeah, that comes like back to the art of doing a deal. Like, can you land on a price that works for you, and the other party is happy and feel like they're getting a good deal as well. And look, with Leicester coming in with a big offer, it means that he's going to get closer to what he's worth. There's lots in it with Jack. Like for me, when I left, I wasn't guaranteed a starting spot. Johnny had come back from France. There was good players coming through in positions that I was filling. The likes of Gary Ringrose was coming through. Rob Kearney was playing well at fullback. So it was different to the scenario that I was in. What I'd also look at if I was in Jack's position is, of the players that have left their home province, who has made it a success. And with with that information, you would be naive in thinking I'm going to be the one who books the trend. So like obviously Johnny went to Racing, didn't quite work out. I went to Bordeaux and on to other clubs. Again, it didn't really work out for me as regarded performance and my coming back and playing for Ireland. Jack McGrath going up to Ulster, Geordie Murphy going to Ulster. Well, they played well there. They didn't progress with their international career, which I think is a big driver for Jack and getting his hands back on that 10 shirt. To explain to people who are listening on how the tax back works, like it is a factor in it. So in essence, for every 100,000 you earn as an Irish rugby player, you get about 15,000 back per 100,000 when you retire for your best 10 years. So if you played for 15 years, you would get your best 10 years. And that is a substantial amount of money when you finish up. So if the difference between a deal is 300 grand, with that tax incentive, that gets you up to 350. And then on top of that, Ireland is very unique in the sense that you get brands like, you look at like Caelan Doris with Lucozade, for example, and that suddenly gets you from 300, 350 with your tax back, and then another 100 on top. That's probably going to go through a limited company. Then you're up to 450. And then you look at what you can get additionally when you're playing for Ireland. There's big bonuses. A Six Nations win, usually washes out at around 8,000. And again, like that's, if you have a Grand Slam, probably closer to 70 or 80,000. And you look at that over the course of 2 or 3 years. Are you giving that up by going to Leicester? And then there's also the factor of like playing for your home club is so special. Like, and it's only when I left that I realized how big that was. Obviously, I knew it was big when I was playing for Leinster, but it's a different feeling when you're playing for another club, and it does actually affect your performance. And then you're going into a new environment, new coaching team. It all takes time, new S&C. So look, for me, I would be encouraging Jack to stay. But I would also be saying, look, this is a business. Like, get the best deal possible. Like, work your agent hard and play that game. And you have to be willing to go to get the best possible deal. If they get any kind of sense that he's only really playing a game here, they'll squeeze you on that deal hard. They have to believe that it's a genuine threat to you not staying.
They do seem like tough negotiators, the RFU.
Yeah, they are tough negotiators, but they're fair as well. Like it's become very much, put the data into the computer and the number will be spat out. If you're coming off the back of an academy contract and you're going on to development or your first contract, they have a set amount of money that they'll give there. There's probably leeway of maybe 10, 15, 20%. Same if you're, a 70 capper for your province, you've got 2 or 3 international caps. Again, a number will be spat out. And then as Rudd mentioned there, if you're consistently playing in the Irish 23, then you're looking at one of these kind of hybrid contracts. And then if you're consistently in the starting 15, you're looking at, a national contract. So it's largely driven by data, and they'll also look at what the market is doing. Like, the market is not as hot as it was in previous years. Like, the salary cap in the UK has come down significantly. When I was moved to Bristol, it was in around 8 million. It's now down to 5. Now it is going back up next year, and it's important to note that Crowley would fall into the marquee signing. So that is actually a signing that is done outside of the salary cap. And then you look at France. Like, France is where the real money is. That's where the big contracts are, because the budgets of the teams are far higher. It's the only league that's really making significant money. The TV deal is phenomenal over there. But they've really got strict with the GIF rule. You can only have a certain amount of non-French players in your overall squad and in your match day 23. And that has greatly affected the ability for them to sign both English and Irish players.
Okay. Won't dwell on it overly, because we've great games to talk about at the weekend. And by the time people hear this, Crowley will have spoken and possibly shed light on things, or quite possibly have, just say all the right things publicly and not tell us his true feelings. I just was struck by Donald Lenihan, and again, that Cork-Con connection I think is strong, using the phrase, they offered a sort of derisory extra few bob. So that for me is as close to maybe what the Crowley camp really think about how they've been treated. I'm asking you about to speculate here. Do you think Crowley feels he's been lowballed here and treated badly?
I would say the entire experience of the 2024-25 season has been bruising for Jack Crowley, and I'd say this contract offer is part of that. It was reasonable to suspect coming into this season that he would get a national contract. You know, he was Ireland's starting 10. He'd started every game for Ireland since the World Cup. He's most important player in Munster, pretty much. But he did start out of form, and he's paying a bit of a price for that. And it was obviously turmoil with Graham Rowntree, but his performances in that South Africa tour, he wasn't dragging the team up to a level. He was playing either at or below the level they were at, and then he had a bad November, and he lost his Ireland place, and suddenly he's in this position where he's coming off the bench for Ireland in all sorts of positions, and then he's getting rested for Munster games when really I'd say he could do with being playing in them. And then you see him on Saturday, and suddenly you go, well, there's Jack Crowley again. You know, and we saw it in Northampton, and we've seen it off the bench for Ireland twice. And we didn't really see it in Rome when he got his big chance. But he is such a good player, and he's such an important player, particularly for Munster. The RFU and Munster are playing a bit of at a time when they are cutting budgets and cutting back, and there's a big push in Munster to break even over the last couple of years and to kind of sort out and that's admirable to a degree. But over the years, Munster have been known for being for overpaying average players, and it's one of the problems they've had at Munster that there's been players on big salaries who really wouldn't get those salaries anywhere else. So if your franchise out half is getting underpaid and you've got players in your squad, and I think they've sorted some of that out over the years, but there's players in your squad who are being overpaid, well, that's an imbalance, because he's the one of all the players in that squad. Him and Casey, I think, are the two that you need to make sure they're happy, they feel part of it, you have them on long-term deals, they feel loved. Like, maybe Crowley with a chip on his shoulder is a good thing for Munster for the rest of the season, but long-term you want him to feel like he's the man, and they're not giving them that sense right now.
As an aside, in more of a cultural point, would you guys in the dressing room all be telling each other what you're on? Would you know what everyone's on in the dressing room?
You probably want to cut maybe 20% off what people are telling you.
Oh, really? It's that kind of... Okay.
Yeah, there's always an element of adding a bit of juice to what you're on. But I think what you would have is you'd have a core group of maybe 5 or 6 guys that you can confide in and say, look, this is what I'm being offered. What are your thoughts? Or what are you on? And then, when you're getting into the finer details of a contract, you could say, look, I landed on this number, but I've got a big bonus if we qualify for Europe. Or I've got a big bonus.
It's interesting because I don't think that's the case in most workplaces. I mean, me and Rod haven't discussed. I don't think people in most workplaces would sit down with 5 or 6 people and go, right, lay it out for me. But I do get that sense of a dressing room in sport. All right. Yeah,
but it's understandable because it's that information is power, and if you know that Ian Madigan's on at such and such, and
he's on Madigan's on what?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I remember when I signed with Bristol, and like the number I was on was in the newspaper, and
it was correct.
Yeah, within like 10%. Yeah. So, but it did create animosity when I went to Bristol, because you'd guys who were on a tenth of what you were on. They're doing all the exact same work that you're doing in the gym and training and putting their body on the line, and unless you're performing at an extremely high level consistently, which you should be when you're on that salary, it can create animosity.
I'll bet, yeah.
And then I remember I put Jamie Heaslip's reported salary for Jamie Heaslip on the back page when he signed his biggest deal for Ireland, which was topped up by Bank of Ireland at the time. I think it was $500,000 a year. So I think we brought, Heaslip signs $1.5 million contract, 3-year deal, and like Wayne Rooney signed a contract the same day for like something similar a week, and it just dwarfed. We're talking, it's such the apples and oranges of it. Like it's not huge money at the end of the day, and for the RFU, in the greater scheme of things, the difference between Jack Crowley, what he's been offered and what they're saving and risking is not that big. In terms of
his happiness,
their overall budgets. They spent $10 million on the World Cup, on just the World Cup camps alone. If they could scrape together an extra $100,000 just to bridge that gap. Sometimes you got to step back from this stuff,
Yeah, but the issue is though, you go $100,000 here, $100,000 there, it racks up, and you look at the Six Nations coming third. Had a big impact on the RFU. Had we won it, you're looking at, prize money of 8 million. That probably comes down to probably maybe 6.5 because they hedge it. We end up with 2 million because that's hedged. It probably gets up to maybe 3.5. But that is a significant amount of money. And, you look at, the decision to not bring Felix Jones into Munster or into the Irish setup, that probably comes down to money. Like, there's a set budget there for coaches. And you look at the team that we have with like Farrell, Goodman, O'Connell, Easterby. If the budget for coaches is, for example, 1.8 million, and you're looking to push that to 2.1 million by bringing Felix in, and then you're giving Crowley another 100 grand and another player another 100 grand. You look at the UK, like there's a reason why 3 clubs have gone bust, and why there's another 2 or 3 clubs in serious financial difficulty. And I think the IRFU are quite careful in how they manage the finances.
Fair points. We will leave that there and push on to the weekend's rugby. Let's start with La Rochelle, Munster. So from McHale Park in Castlebar to La Rochelle, that's the deal for Munster this week. Interesting comments from Mike Prendergast in the papers today. He was out doing media yesterday. I think a kind of just a straightforward maturity to Mike Prendergast. Are you disappointed you didn't get the job? He's asked. And instead of saying, oh gosh, no, he said, I was very disappointed I didn't get the job. And he said, but look, this type of a gig, you can't sit around and feel sorry for yourself. He mentioned the meeting with Clayton McMillan last week. I sat down with them, sat down with a few people in the club as well. We talked about the vision. That's the reality. But I was disappointed when I heard the news. It's human nature. You go for a job, you don't get it. And I think, that's perfectly fair thing to say. Initially, I saw the headlines, Prendergast disappointment, and I thought, God, how will McMillan feel here? A number 2 who's just sitting there looking at his job, wanting his job. Is that the best dynamic? But I think Prendergast is perfectly entitled to say this, and he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's not over it and won't get on with things very professionally.
No, I thought, I'd rather he was honest, and I think McMillan would rather that as well. And I think of the late Anthony Foley, when Munster brought in Rassie Erasmus on top of him, there was a disappointment there, and Rassie Erasmus has spoken about this. There was a huge disappointment there, but once they got in the room, Foley recommitted almost, and he actually enjoyed working under Rassie Erasmus enormously, and I think that was, had things not unfolded the way they did, it would have been really good for his coaching career long term, because it took a lot of the pressure off him and allowed him to focus on what was good about the job. So Mike Prendergast, I think he's probably disappointed with the way the process was handled, and it dragged on for a long time, and he kind of came out publicly and said, I want the job, and he was left hanging in the wind for a long time. Now, there was, I think, a bit of back and forth between the IRFU and Munster. I think Munster wanted to go local, and the IRFU thought that looks a little bit inexperienced, and David Humphreys has gone out and got a really experienced, highly regarded New Zealand coach with a hard edge who looks like a really good fit for Munster. And Mike Prendergast, when he steps back from it and starts working under McMillan next year, will perhaps think that this 3 years is a finishing school for him, because McMillan's a future All Blacks coach. Certainly the way to talk about him in New Zealand. So he's here to get his OE, to work in Europe, to get the experience. Maybe he'll be here for longer than 3 years. But the IRFU are also backing Prendergast in that he was the Ireland A coach during the Six Nations. He's going to be part of Paul O'Connell's coaching ticket and probably the senior coach on that coaching ticket in the summer. I'd imagine this is going to be a recurring thing where they bring him up because he's so respected in terms of what he can do. But it's that thing of lacking head coach experience. And maybe he needs to go back abroad as a head coach, having worked in France for a decade, and before they trust him to take over, because the provincial head coaching jobs are so important, as we can see. But I think it's great that he was frank about it, but I don't think it's for an instant going to be, he'll be sulking when Clayton McMillan comes in, because he loves Munster too much, and he's too good at his job and has too much of a good attitude. He's really respected Mike Prendergast, and we saw on Saturday with some of the stuff that he comes up with, he makes Munster a better team.
Yeah. So this is such an intriguing game all of a sudden, in part because of La Rochelle's capitulation post that defeat to Leinster, 7 defeats and 1 draw and 8. But also because there's kind of signs of life in Munster, and the team news is good as well. Peter O'Mahony is in contention based on how he gets through the week's training. Craig Casey, as we saw, returned from knee surgery in December and came through beautifully in Castlebar. You throw into the mix Ollie Jaeger's back, Jean Klein is back, Niall Scannell. John Hodnett is a doubt. He went off in Castlebar. It would be helpful if he's around. Tacker Abrams is in the mix. I don't know how likely. And we will know later today. Unfortunately, the hearing hasn't happened yet on Nankivell and his appeal against that red card for the hit on Prendergast. But all in all, that's kind of, February when they lost away to Edinburgh, you would have looked at this fixture and said, no, not going to happen.
Yeah, the game against Connacht was a huge one off the back of poor performance against Edinburgh, and then got themselves in a good position to beat Glasgow, and that would have been a big scalp. But they'll be disappointed with the final 10 minutes of that game. The Munster of old, I think, find a way to squeeze out a win there. And I know Rudd mentioned like Crowley not being available for certain games. Had he been even on the bench there, I think he comes on in the final 20 minutes and gets a win for Munster. But that in turn meant that this game against or the game against Connacht was actually a must win. Had they not won that game, they were suddenly under pressure to make top 8. Now they do have a good run in. Their last 4 games are all winnable. They've now won the game against Connacht with a bonus point and are now potentially looking at getting into the top 4, which would be a great result. And the way it is in the URC, having a home quarter final is a huge advantage. Like if you have to go down to the likes of the Sharks or the Bulls, it is extremely difficult to win there. And it's also what that win has done for their confidence and the style of the win. Like I was really, really impressed with Munster at the weekend. I've been critical of their defense at times this year, and I was disappointed with the energy and the communication at times, and I just thought their defense lacked a buzz to it. And I wasn't quite seeing like the impact tackles or like ferociousness at the breakdown. But the defense against Connacht, and like they were without Nankivell for I think it was 55 minutes, and then they'd a sin bin of arguably their best forward in Tadhg Furlong. So they're playing with 13 men for for a good chunk of the game and at the end of the match. But when you go through that and you come out the other side of it with a win, it fills you with confidence. It's like, we can do this when we're a man short or two men short. And they needed that. And that's what they're going to have to do to beat La Rochelle. Like Raj will know that there's a way that he can win this game. And he just needs to go back to it. He needs to make it emotional for his players. He needs to go back to the power game, make the pitch really small. And that's, like, he nearly got over the line against Leinster earlier in the year with that just ferociousness, the tight power game, contesting the breakdown hard. And then when they get the opportunities, they shift the ball, 2 quick passes to the edge. And that's where they are still dangerous. But yeah, Munster going over, it's a great time to be going to La Rochelle. Confidence is low. Rog has spoken publicly a few times. He's questioned, are the players still listening to him and taking direction as well as they were in previous seasons. But I still think that they pull out a big game. They're an emotional team, and this at home, it's going to be very, very difficult for Munster to go there and win.
Some of what you said echoes very much with Prendergast's thoughts on the game as well. Like you talked there about seeing some ferocity at the breakdown from Munster, which had been missing. So Prendergast was talking about the game, and he said, when I was in France at Grenoble, Grateur is a poacher. La Rochelle have about 13 Grateurs across the squad. It's the same this week. If they find that early in the game at the breakdown, that's when their crowd gets behind them. The other side of the coin is, if we can have an influence on that as well, then we can perform. And like a standout memory from the Leinster game is Aldred and Doris going at it at the breakdown. It was ferocious. So that Ian's mentioned it, Prendergast has mentioned it. It's what I think about when I think of La Rochelle at their best. That fight on the ground. Yeah,
there were like 2 heavyweights trading blows that day, and that's the thing with La Rochelle. They have players who can get to that level, and they're probably the closest to. I know the Bulls beat Leinster, kind of a changed Leinster last week, but they're the closest team. That was the closest Leinster have come to losing all season. And La Rochelle were brilliant that day. They really, really, like, apart from, I think 10 is a weakness. I don't think Antoine Hostoy, certainly he wasn't confident at that time. I think with a different 10, they probably win that game. And they kind of mangled the end game a little bit. but their confidence levels are on the floor now. So if Munster start the game the way they started against Connacht at the weekend and get a score, get a bit of scoreboard pressure and get a little bit of a lead on, which they're capable of because they went to Northampton in January, and I know they lost that game, but they created loads, they withstood moments of pressure, and they came back, and they're able to. They love this time of year because the ground's hard. They're a fast team. They're not the Munster of old. They're not going to ever go and get involved. They can go to war, but they're not really built for war. They're built for top of the ground, playing quick, really nice set play moves. 2 quality halfbacks. They'll miss Nankerville if he's banned, but like they have the weapons to hurt teams, and they'll be banking on a quick start because if they get up. Like apparently 500 tickets got re-released on the public market, which never happens in La Rochelle. There's a sense of the end of an era here, and I'm not saying that O'Gara's in any trouble necessarily because they've got a cavalry coming in for next season. They've got really good signings on the way. There's going to be a renewal, but in rugby you can't do that right away. There's no transfer window, so you got to wait till next year. So there is a window there for them to go and win, and they're capable of doing it, and they've done it like. We can never, it's a cliche, but I was in Toulon last year where they beat Toulon, like a team that on paper they should never be beaten. They have a litany of great wins in France, and they can lean back on that. They've all experienced that, and they know what it feels like. And I know they haven't got a great recent record, just they're not coming in like on the back of 5 wins in a row. But that win in McHale Park was really important for them because they looked like the Munster that won the URC 2 years ago, that finished top of the URC last year. So there's a bit of a spring, and when they get their 23 together, which it looks like they pretty much will have this weekend, they're as good as nearly any team out there. The problem is that once they have to go beneath that, they don't have the quality. But they have a really good 15 and a good bench.
I think that was born out in the Northampton game. That was a 2-point defeat. The week before, they'd beaten Saracens. The week before that, if you remember, it was Christmas in Thomond. And to your point about squad depth, Leinster beat a Jack Crowley-less Munster like 28-7. And it just felt like this place is on the floor. But they rebounded Saracens. Then it was Northampton. They beat the Dragons. We're kind of into Six Nations territory. The loss away to Edinburgh was poor. They did okay in Glasgow. And as Ian said, that Connacht win and the players coming back, it's just like in the nick of time for a European game feel. I suppose the interesting thing, Ian, is you kind of feel La Rochelle have that same pedigree for big knockout European games. Like I agree with Rory. I think everyone feels the great team that O'Gara built is at the end of the road. This is it. Antonio, Dante, Doolan, Skelton, Bottia. Like I love Bottia. Every time I see Bottia, I just fall in love with the guy. Every time he wins a breakdown, I just can't but love him. West, Kerbar, they're all moving on. Like this is, and Legaric is coming in, and the Leon fullback's coming in, who's a great player as well. So I suppose the question is with La Rochelle is whatever about week to week where the arse is falling out of the thing, akin to the Leinster performance, do they have that emotional energy to look at each other and say, okay, we're not what we were. Can we win the next 3-4 games in Europe and do something? Now, I don't know where they are in that respect, but I would think that's what they might be trying to funnel into.
Yeah, and like it's an interesting point on Raj, and it ties into what we were talking about with Munster earlier. Like if you're head coach or DO or director of rugby, like your role is so much more than planning sessions and picking the team and blowing the whistle. Like recruitment of who you're bringing in externally and contracting and what you're doing with your current players and who what offers you're making to them. Are they past their best? What are they going to get if they go to market? Can we lowball them and spend money elsewhere? Like that is a huge, huge part of it.
So when Raj is coming out after like the Racing game and publicly questioning the team and then having to row back and apologise, your point there is that could be more than just about how you've played that day. That could be, well, 3 days ago I said I'm halving your wages if you want to stay. That kind of stuff's going on.
Yeah, if you did that to the wrong player who has, a voice in the dressing room. But it's also like, we're talking about like the likes of Legaric and the Georgian Flyer and the fullback coming in. It's probably a year too late. And like, I'm not saying Rog is under pressure, but every coach is under pressure in the top 14. But has he got the recruitment right for this year? No, he probably hasn't. And you look at some of the guys that he brought in, like Noel is probably past his best. He's had a lot of big injuries. He hasn't been available enough for La Rochelle. That does come into it. When you're signing a player, you're looking at their injury profile, and it comes back to, the data. Has he had some big injuries beforehand? That's going to affect their value, whether you sign them. Are they going to be able to play 10 times or 30 times for you in a year? I think, look, the key for Munster is they got to have all their firepower on the pitch. Nankivell needs to get off today. That's a big one in the centre, because they do have good quality players in the centre. They're very powerful, and when they go forward through the middle of you, it is pretty devastating, because then you've got the likes of Antonio, Aldrich, Jegu piling around the corner, and it does feel a bit like a tidal wave. Thackeray are having some real speed in that back three. When a side is low in confidence, they will cough up ball, and being able to counter attack. We've seen how devastating the likes of France, Bordeaux, Toulouse are. When you turn the ball over, moving it to your fast guy and letting him run, it can be as simple as that. And then I think Klein being back fit is huge. And then Hodnett is also really important. And then the obvious one of Peter O'Mahony. Like, I think, Pete had a rest the last couple of weeks. He'll have had this one earmarked in the calendar of like, this is, potentially my last big day out. Let's make sure it's not my last big day out. And it's teed up for a legendary Munster performance with the likes of Pete leading from the front.
Yeah.
Sorry, the one other point I'd say is I think Munster have a big advantage at halfback. I was so impressed with Casey coming back and Crowley at the weekend. Like, the reality is the two guys hadn't played together for the guts of like 3 or 4 months. Crowley had barely played it out half, and they came in and they were like a halfback combo that were coming off the back of 8-10 games together. It was just a joy to watch how how Casey gets the ball out of the breakdown, but also how he manages the opponent's defense, his ability to fish players out. The try that the hooker gets over Bundy, it's subtle, but like Casey all game was not only getting outside the first defender, he was interesting the second defender, and it meant that Munster just kept getting over the gain line. And then he also managed the game really well for Crowley. Like, it was like clear communication. Crowley got the ball when he wanted it. When he didn't want it, Casey managed the ball. And the best stat for me, and I'm not really a big stat man, but Munster had a red card yet for 55 minutes, yet they had 63% territory. And that is like just phenomenal as a halfback pairing to manage your team and keep the ball in front of your team for 55 minutes with a red card.
And 40 of those were against a really bad wind as well, Ian.
Yeah, exactly. The conditions were tough, but I like Crowley put together just a complete performance for me. He ran the ball well. His tackling was exceptional. Like, he put in 2 huge hits on Heffernan, and when Heffernan had a dream come true for a hooker, the overthrow, and you get to run at the opposition 10, and Crowley just stops him dead. And then it was the tactical kicking. He consistently found grass, and then Ioane ended up in the backfield quite a lot for Connacht. And look, he's not a fullback and he's not particularly good in the air, but it's difficult to expose that. And Crowley did it on 3 or 4 occasions.
It's kind of a fascinating dynamic that the Irish starters are together at Leinster and the understudies are together as a partnership at Munster. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they look at each other and say, let's both go out here and put it down a little marker.
Well, I think Casey is closer to Gibson Park than most people realise. He was so unlucky in the summer that he got his chance. Gibson Park gets injured against the Bulls and he goes on that tour, and then Orgy Snyman knocks him out. It was such a sickening blow and such a bad moment for him. And obviously this injury, like, I think Ireland really missed Craig Casey in the Six Nations because they lacked energy in those last 2 games, and no one gives you more energy. But it's not just energy. I think he could underplay his skills and his knowledge and his leadership. Like, I remember he made his debut against Italy in 2021, and Johnny Sexton came into the press conference and said he reminded him of Johnny Wilkinson, the one player that, like, mindset-wise, he's really highly regarded. And he's had to bide his time, and he's had to be really patient behind Conor Murray, because Conor Murray's one of the senior men in that Ireland camp. But I wonder if Murray would have been able to go on out in his own terms in the Six Nations had Casey not got injured, because he had a good November. He was playing really well for Munster. I I think he could really push Gibson Park in the next year for that Ireland spot. I really do. I think he's so high quality, and he gives you something. He's not different to Gibson Park. They're quite similar, actually, but he gives you an ability to take Gibson Park off after an hour and up the tempo. And he takes some really good options. I think some of the... I remember Andy Dunn, he may have been talking to you on Off the Ball a couple of years ago, saying that he's one-paced, but in the kind of... It's always the highest possible gear. Like, you know, I think he's learned a little bit about calm and game management, and his kicking is really good, and he gets tries as well. I thought he was really good at the weekend, and Crowley needs to make... Like, this needs to be his level now for the rest of the season, because he's clearly... Whatever about what the rest of us think within the Irish setup, he's lost ground on Prendergast. But if he plays like that from here to the end of the year, well, then he's closed that gap. I mean, obviously, it's up to Prendergast then to stay at a higher level. But that was the Jack Crowley Ireland will want to see, because if he plays that well consistently, if he goes to La Rochelle and dominates in La Rochelle, if he backs it up in Bordeaux a week later in a quarter final, if he leads Munster to a really good finish to the season, well, then both of them will have done themselves some real credit in the bank. Yeah.
Final word on that, on those two. It sounds like Casey and Crowley complement each other quite well the way you're talking, and they're both chasing down the other two in Leinster. So that's an extra nice dynamic to the partnership.
Yeah, and like this week is a huge game for Lions contention as well. Like if Munster were to lose this, you know, you're losing potentially 3 additional opportunities to get your share price up to then go on the Lions tour. He's in contention. Casey is definitely still in contention for me. He knows Farrell's system. The scrum half is the key guy in the attack for and defense in Farrell's system. And he's competing against the likes of Tomas Williams from Gloucester, the Northampton 9, Mitchell. If Munster were to win and he is a big performance, and then he goes on to the quarter final, and then they continue their run in the league, it's not unthinkable that Casey can still make it. And I'd echo Rudd's point. Like, Ireland did miss him in the Six Nations. You look at the drop off at the end of the English game, the Scottish game, the impact of the bench against Wales. Could we have had him for the last 20 minutes against France? And had he been starting against Italy, like he just demands standards. You know, this guy's a winner, and he just has this consistent energy about him. I'd say he's a joy to play with.
Yeah. To round off La Rochelle Munster talk, then team news, by the way, for La Rochelle is so. Dante is a maybe. That would obviously be a big plus if he was in. Kerr Barlow a doubt. Paul Boudon, I think you mentioned unlikely. One word on Rog. How? I mean, we get dispatches, media appearances, columns, so you get some sense of where his head's at fairly routinely. How is he handling this, the rockiest period of his career?
Yeah, well, I think Ian's touched on it, and you mentioned as well. Like, he's tried everything. He's pushed the nuclear button in terms of going after his players and calling them out. Then he tried to throw an arm around them in public, and that hasn't worked either. I would say his self-belief hasn't been shaken. I'd say he still believes that he can get a tune out of his team, that he can find a way of getting through to them. I'm interested, like, that he uses a guy called David Sharkey, who runs a kind of theming company in Ireland, and he brings him in for periods. And I wonder how he's theming this week, because it's so special for him and for Donnacha Ryan and for Ultan Delan, who never played for Munster but is from Kerry, and Sean Dougal, their strength and conditioning coach, who played for Munster. It can separate for them the emotion, but Munster means nothing to the vast majority of the squad. So, and you wonder how they're feeling about him right now. So if he tries to make it about him and Munster and all that sort of stuff, does that jar with the players? You were like, well, fuck you, we haven't lost the game. It's not about you. Or does he kind of try and remove that? Does he try and embrace the hordes of Munster fans coming over, that they're taking our tickets, this is our home. It's gonna, like, he's really good at pushing those buttons, and it's worked for him so often in the past. And this competition, they've had dips. I know they lost to Benetton a week after almost beating Leinster, but this competition has brought the best out of them. So he's doing, I think there's a press conference again today, and it'd be interesting how he tries to frame it, and how he frames it internally. But I'm sure he would have envisaged this moment or imagined this moment countless times. He has coached against them before as a Racing 92 assistant, but he never would have envisaged the Red Army descending on La Rochelle and him at such a low ebb. It's
God, it's delicious.
So it's delicious, but it's like he'd love to be.
No, I know it's terrible.
Because I mean, it's always been like the question of whether he'll ever come back and coach them, and it looks less and less likely by the year. And he's had a go off them in the media at times, and he's used his column to be quite scathing about the operation. And even during the Six Nations, he was quite critical of Jack Crowley, and backtracked on it a bit once Crowley kind of effectively proved them wrong to a degree. So there's so many undercurrents. He tried to sign Crowley at one stage. There's so much this week to get stuck into. I'm writing a piece, and I haven't quite figured out what it is yet about kind of his shadow has hung over Munster since he's retired. It was so difficult for Ian Keatley to follow him. Joey Carberry didn't really fill the boots, partly because of his own injuries, and now Crowley's emerged, and he tried to sign Crowley, and like all this stuff is going on in the mix this week. Munster, certainly they talked about him yesterday, but Ian Costello was very keen on Saturday not to talk about Rog and make this about Rog, but it is about Rog. It's always about Rog.
And again, he's in the Irish Examiner every week. You know what I mean? He's just hanging around the province. Like La Rochelle, by the way, they are. It's not like the players are there having a smoke, going, "Hey, look, whatever." Like every time they talk publicly, Antonio was saying, "We have to, talk stops. We have to go." Ruaidhri last week when they drew with Castres, and that's when like Ruaidhri, Boudon, Jégu, Antonio were all back. They scored 2 tries in 15 minutes, and you thought, okay, the cavalry's here, they'll be fine. And then they draw 12-all, and Ruaidhri comes out like livid, defiant. We play to win. We'll go to Claremont, we'll win. We'll go to Munster, we'll win. Or we'll have Munster, we'll win. They go to Claremont and lose 33-19. So they've kind of tried to psych themselves up, and nothing really seems to be working.
And it's similar to last year. I mean, they went. He took them to Stormers, and they won in the Stormers. But they arrived in Leinster, and they went to Cork, and we all thought he was planning something. And even they went in at half time in the mix in that game, and they got blown away by Leinster. And I just think that team, again, it's so hard to lift a team out of a cycle of results like that. And confidence is clearly low for the organisation. The players from France are coming in after winning the Six Nations, but they can't get through to the odds of being there the whole time. And there's it's in the stands, it's everywhere, and maybe this is the one, because Munster invading their hometown may bring something out of the crowd and get a response out of the crowd, and the weather will be nice, and it'll be it'll be a fun game to play in and a fun game to watch, and maybe this is the day, but you're kind of dealing in maybes when they were at their best. You were dealing in certainties.
Yes, a bit of muscle memory and smelling salts required. Ian Madigan, who wins?
Oh, I really hope Munster win.
Look at this guy playing to the gallery. It's sickening.
Yeah, no, I do. I really do. That's a really tough one to call. I think it's going to be a real arm wrestle of the game and come down to a big moment. I'm going to say Munster by 2 points.
Oh, okay. Bookies have La Rochelle by 6.
Yeah. I think we do have to caveat last week by how poor Connacht were. And Munster were excellent. It was probably their best performance of the season. But they were playing against a team who were conceding a lot of points on a regular basis and didn't, only begin to play once games are gone. So it's a big step up from there to what they're going to this week. And my sense is that if La Rochelle play to their strengths, and as Ian said, get Munster into corners, and they have the pack, they have the size, but it wouldn't be a major shock if Munster pulled it off.
Yeah, I'm going to say Nankivell needs to get off that red card. If he's not playing, I would say I'd be swaying towards La Rochelle winning.
Okay,
but I think he might get off that red card.
Oh yeah, okay. We won't go too into that because people will have found out by the time they're listening to this. So
depends on how deep they get. Sometimes these disciplinary hearings can drag on for days.
So that game beautifully set up on a knife edge. Now let's go to Croke Park. 60,000 through the gates. I mean, you think they had 11,000 on Saturday night for 2 games, and Leinster going magic up 60,000 is really quite something. So I mean, if this was the Aviva, it's a complete sellout and then some. Really amazing. Harlequins are 7th in the Premiership. They did, to be fair to them, beat a full-strength Saris last week, but then at the weekend just gone, they lost to Bath and shipped 47 points. Leinster obviously put 47 on Bath in January. There's the Marcus Smith, Sam Prendergast subplot. There's the likes of Don Brandt and Cunningham South and Lee Halfpenny, who joined this year, all part of the Quinn setup. But Am I missing something here? Is this a fairly routine, a game we're all going to forget pretty quickly? Might be a bit of fun if Harlequins throw the ball around. Routine 15 to 20 point win for Leinster?
It should be, but Northampton made it very difficult for them in the semi-final last year, and I do think Harlequins, I mean, they went and beat Bordeaux away in a knockout game last year. They're capable of...
That was a wild game, yeah.
That was a wild game, and Leinster don't try not to, Leinster try not to engage in that sort of stuff. That their defence is so strong, but, Smith has a point to prove in this next couple of weeks. I mean, we talked about Lions, and he's lost his England place, and he's got to earn some credit, and like we know, Andy Farrell will be watching this game. This is one where if he comes in and makes a mark, then he could unlock the Leinster defence, and Finn Russell did it in the pool game for Bath. But Bath, and I think this is where Harlequins will fall short. They just don't have a 23 capable of living with Leinster's physicality over the course of 80 minutes. I think they can probably throw punches, and they can even. They're a team that they when they won the league a couple of years ago, they were coming from behind every week, so you're never safe against them. They have a very canny scrum coach in Adam Jones, who did a job on Ireland when he was working with Wales a couple of weeks ago. Now it's a stronger Leinster front row than that Ireland front row was that day, but still there's something to be considered there. But ultimately, yeah, this Leinster should get to the final. They're on the right side of the draw. They're better than all the teams that are on the side of the draw that they're on, and they just can't think that way. They've got to, and I don't think they will. I mean, the Flew, Barrett, Snyman, and Slimani, as well as Jacques Nienaber and Blindell back from South Africa. They had a goal-setting session in Wicklow on last Tuesday to kind of just reset and hone in on this part of the season. They've had a 2-week prep when Harlequins played a league game last week. They've got all their Ireland guys back, nicely rested. They got a lovely lift at the weekend when their B/C team went to beat the full-strength Sharks in Durban. It's set up for them. It's always set up for them. This is what they're very good at. So it will be one of the great European shocks if they don't win.
Yeah, it's all pointing one direction, Ian.
Yeah, I think Leinster, we're going to see some of the frustration coming out from the Irish players of the disappointment of the French game, and probably a bit of fatigue had set in from the Italian match, and now they're coming into this game. They've had 2 weeks off. They would have had a mental and physical break, and then would have been able to recondition without having to have a game to worry about at the weekend, which is very different. You can push yourself in the gym in a different way, and just fine tune things. I think Leinster are going to really dish it up to Harlequins. We haven't yet seen a truly whooping Leinster performance yet this year. Claremont, in fairness to them, stuck it to them. Bath kept in a contest for a large part of the game. And in the league, while they were unbeaten until the Bulls game, they didn't really put teams to the sword. Like you think of Cardiff coming over, Lions, Stormers. They were still in a contest until about 50 minutes, and then Leinster slowly began to pull away. But I think that they want to put down a performance that everyone turns their head in Europe and go, these guys are number one seed for a reason.
Okay. Tadhg Furlong spoke to the media last week, Rory. He is a man very at ease with himself, and so he held court with you guys and touched on his late father, touched on becoming a father himself, touched on Wexford and what it means to him, touched on his injury situation, which people are very curious about. So tell us.
Yeah, he was great because we don't talk to him very often. He's very at ease with himself, but he's not that interested in speaking to the media that often, and he hadn't spoken since his dad died, which is completely understandable. It was a Sundays chat, which is a smaller group in a kind of a room in Leinster where the player I did one with Ronan Keller. It's just a better setting for players to open up a little bit than your regular press conference.
There might be 10, 15 people.
Often, so all the Ireland press conferences now have cameras on, so the players are always behind a table with a backdrop, and it's a bit more staged, or it's very hard to get the players at ease. Whereas Furlong comes into the room, there's no press officer. Mark Sabukla just lets them. He knows they're big boys. And
how many journalists?
It was 5 of us.
Nice number to say.
No, it was, and it was very relaxed. And Tadhg, he's a 32, 33-year-old man now. He's a father. He's been through a lot in the last year in terms of his. In fairness, he said the injuries really don't bother him. He's kind of okay with where his body's at. That it's been troubling him, but it's not. this injury has never felt career threatening. Whereas in 2020 during lockdown, he had 12 resets, like 12 times his calves broke down on him, and he had to go through all that. And at that time, he was worried about it, whereas now he's not. So it was good because it's rare that you get those opportunities. I mean, ideally you get them one-on-one, but that happens less and less now. And I think the benefit, I don't know, like I'd hope that they see the benefit of it as well, and that they're able to talk, give a, I think the end product was better because it was a good setting. So yeah, it was great. And I thought he came across very well. There was stuff he didn't really want to get into. There was stuff he did, and he considered every question on its merits, and it was interesting to chat to him. And you think about him, like we say, Leinster haven't been at their best this year. Well, they've got him and Dan Sheehan in the starting team for the first time all year, alongside Andrew Porter, tight 5 this season, this week. And Kelleher's, if he's not back this week, he'll be back next week. So you've got such a strong tight 5. They're far more, like, they're even better set up to succeed. And there's some lads coming back from South Africa demanding minutes. I think Tommy O'Brien is someone that I think can give Leinster another dimension this season if they back him. And I'm not sure they will, because they've kind of kept this. I haven't got an exact number of players they kept back, but I imagine there's 23 of them. But I think he played so well against the Sharks that you get, like, the right wings open, get him into that starting team and see what he can do against the Harlequins. I think he's got real Ireland potential, and his body hasn't played ball. It's broken down on him repeatedly, but he's quick, he's strong, he's defensive, his attitude is great, and he's a player of a profile that Leinster don't have.
It was reassuring to read Furlong on the injury situation, because I think from afar, you're never totally on top of each player's body, but I was kind of thinking, these calves are the calf or the back or the hand, something's betraying him here. All the mood music is bad, and yet he was very sanguine about the thing, and that was really good. He's funny on things like Wexford, like he says, where people will be like, Tadhg, to get his attention. I'm from Wexford, and he's like, cool. So he's funny as well.
Incredibly grounded.
Difficult time after his dad, I'm sure. Did he go into great depth about that?
He spoke about it. I mean, his dad died of cancer, and he spoke about how he didn't say it was a relief, but how he almost had pre-grieve because he'd watched his dad go through so much pain, and he was at peace with the fact that he passed away. But even the fact that he's been through that grief, he's become a father. Like, that all plays, I think, a part in your body not playing ball with you.
But the body carries stress. I must say, anytime I looked at him when you knew his father was ill and then when he'd passed away, with any player, I look at their form through a completely different lens. Your body feels that, carries that. There's no doubt.
Yeah, and like, there's an awful lot of he plays. He's such an important player for Ireland. He's got 6 Lions tests. I think those Lions tests take years away from you. They're so intense, those tours, and his hamstring and his calves have to be perfect because so much goes through his back, and it's like he loads so much in each scrum that I think he could have played if it was a Champions Cup final or a World Cup final. They probably would have been able to do something to get him on the field, but because it was a series of 5 matches, and because he's got a long career and he's too important, they didn't risk him. And I'm sure if he played against Italy, he must have been close to playing against France, but they just didn't want to risk it. And that's good. That's player management. That's why the Irish system is what it is, because they're being conservative with a player like that in the hope that he will add more in the long term. But what was key for me in the middle of it all was they gave him a 2-year contract, because if they weren't confident and he wasn't confident in his body, they wouldn't have done that. So
it's funny. Fair point. Sorry, cut across to you. During the Six Nations at one stage, Ian, he won't mind me saying it because it's not off the record or anything. Ireland just weren't kind of fizzing in attack. And I turned to Rob Kearney sitting beside me and said, like, it's just not happening. And he wasn't saying it was the only reason, but he did say, you miss Tadhg Furlong at these moments. Those hands, it's mad, like, as a playmaker as much as everything else.
Yeah, like, obviously the core jobs as a tight head, his scrum, his maul, but he's a crucial link man for Ireland, and his carrying is good. His ability to tip the ball, play those pullbacks to the out half. He is crucial to Ireland being successful and Leinster being successful. I think, like, for me, looking back on the Six Nations, it wasn't actually Ireland's attack that I was disappointed with. It was more the defence. Like, I was really hoping that Ireland's defence would employ the system that Leinster are using, which has been exceptionally good. There's a reason why Leinster have won all their games bar one this year, and the reason why they concede the lowest amount of points. Ireland, on the other hand, conceded the most amount of line breaks, the most points that they've conceded in a Six Nations in a long time. Their line speed wasn't there from comparative to Leinster, and the biggest one for me is the lowest number of impact tackles. You look at the likes of Menoncello for Italy, who had the highest individual in the backs, most impact tackles. Ireland's system just didn't have that, and the way that the game has gone, defense is all about getting off the line, making impact tackles, contesting the breakdown, and if you can do that consistently, you'll suffocate the attack and you'll probably come out on top. Versus Leinster's defense, for me, is just so good. And that was their second string side at the weekend against a high quality Sharks team. Now, look, I know the Sharks are playing really poorly, but you still have brilliant individuals who are powerful, quick, agile. And, the likes of Liam Turner, Tommy O'Brien, who we mentioned, getting up high off the line and whacking the Sharks players in tackles, then contesting the breakdown. It just completely suffocated them. Like Tommy O'Brien put in one of the best tackles I've seen on Mpimpy at the start of the game. And when that happens to you, you don't want to get involved again. You're like, I'm steering clear of that guy. And Mpimpy just took himself out of the game. He had no impact on the match after that. And that is like, there was criticism being made that Nian Aber's system was affecting how Ireland were playing. Like, it's the best defensive system in the world. Ireland should be learning off this guy. And in my view, we should have brought in Felix Jones, because Felix knows that system inside out, and he's the one who's driven it. Versus, Easterby double jobbing, being the head coach and still being the defensive coach. I just thought we missed a trick there. I think we're going to see the Leinster players going out and looking to prove a point and show how good the Leinster system is, and show the Irish coaches we should be using this system.
Okay.
It has occurred to me that, like, when you step back from it, how is the double World Cup winning coach in Ireland, and he's not working with the Irish national team?
God damn it, lads. We're at an hour mark. You can't just raise the most interesting thing of the whole conversation now. Can we come back to this next week? It is really... You throw that one in. Jesus. We got to move on. That is... yeah, okay. We will come back to that for sure. Let's wrap this up. Saracens 12:30 on Saturday. Munster are in the same boat here. So Munster, their reward, if they go to La Rochelle and pull this off, they will most likely have... Bordeaux away. And then Toulouse in the semi-final.
Possibly stay the week and set up shop. Roger will sort them out with some accommodation.
Would you be willing to cover that week? You go to the press conferences.
My wife might not let me, but yeah.
Whereas Saracens, and this is from the horse's mouth, like they're not even kind of being coy about this. They're just being fairly upfront about it. So Mark McCall, we made the decision to do this halfway through the Six Nations. After we lost to Castres in the group stages, we got the difficult side of the draw. So what this is basically to rest all of their frontline English players. Basically, in the 3 matches after the Six Nations, they're obligated to rest the centrally contracted players for at least one of those matches. Now, they played them in both their Premiership matches. So, Tadhg has played 22 matches this season. Willis has to be rested for one of these games, Tom Willis. The likes of Jamie George, Elliot Daly, Ben Earl, they don't have to be rested, but he's decided, look, if I'm resting a Tadhg and I'm resting Willis, I'm going to rest everyone. And so he's chosen this game over the Premiership, want to prioritise Premiership once he saw the draw they were in. And it's like there's no point sugarcoating it. It's a 2 fingers to the tournament, Ian, really. It's our domestic league is more important than European rugby. It's a bit defeatist as well. We're on the bad side of the draw. You'd kind of take this if it wasn't from like Saracens, who've been such a big part of this tournament over the last decade. We're at the knockout stages. Like, I don't know. You can't really like throw the book at them or anything, but it's just so poor. Like, are we trying to kill this tournament? Like, rugby doesn't know what's good for itself sometimes.
Yeah, I really didn't like it, and it was the English teams that were pushing really hard for the format of the competition to change. Yet you've got the final 16 and teams, flying the white flag. you also like look at the Premiership now. Like 3 teams have gone bust. There's 6 less games as a result of that. And then the other side to it, you could say, is look, the game has just got so much more physical, and these players just can't go back-to-back games off the back of a tough Six Nations. But you think back to the great like Saracens wins of old. Like, remember they came to the Aviva, I know it was during COVID, but like they would have been massive underdogs to beat Leinster. I think it was 2022.
Yeah.
And they pulled off a great performance. And they're similar to La Rochelle. Like, they're going through a bit of a transition. Some of their quality players are past their peak, and they don't have the depth in their squad that they had previously. Look, the salary cap has hurt them. The controversy that they had, in previous years, opening up their books, they've had to do everything above board, and that you can see that they just don't have the depth of their squad. But you can also say as well, like, we need to focus on European qualification for next year, or making the top 4 for this year. You're in the competition. You're going to Toulon, who are a beatable side. Like, Toulon have been good this year, but they like, I would still be backing Sarries on their day. They know that they can beat a side like them.
Yeah, look, it's incredibly disappointing, and it's another red flag for this format doesn't work. The round of 16 doesn't work. I think it should be a streamlined 16-team competition, with a better pool stage that makes more sense to fans, and then no round of 16, just quarterfinal, semi-final, final, spaced out, so you've got time to recover in games. Thinking of Munster fans, if they do pull off an incredible coup this weekend, how many of them are going to get back to Bordeaux next week? And this whole tournament is about away fans. I mean, that's one of the really big things that makes it.
That back-to-back
you have a week to plan it. Whereas if you have a 3-week build up to a quarter final, then you can get a bit of a movement towards it. I mean, that's
not to mention a trip to South Africa for others.
Yeah, and it's like, that's obviously it's a first world problem if they win, but it does diminish the achievement of getting there, and also it undermines their chances of winning that game. And Bordeaux were top seeds for a reason. They've earned home advantage just like Leinster. But yeah, especially, you're right, Saracens, Mark McCall won this tournament as a player with Ulster. He was injured, but he lifted the trophy on the day, and then he's won it 3 times as a coach, and Saracens are steeped in Europe. So if the organisers, and like the leagues are the stakeholders in this, it's not like the leagues are completely separate to it. If it's not working, they've got to come up with a way of fixing it. But it seems like they're stuck in this, because of the lack of weekends and the number of games and player management. They're stuck in this vicious cycle of the same issues cropping up, because the Bulls did the same thing last year, except for they won a last 16 game and then rested all their players for a quarter final, which completely undermined that. So we'll have great games this weekend, and Saracens B team may turn up and with a bit of a, this often happens that everyone writes them off and they turn up, but it still isn't the best against the best, and that's what we signed up for.
For time purposes, both of you give me final thoughts on Connacht and their kind of porous defence, but exciting attack against Cardiff, who they've beaten twice this year. Collie Tucker in charge, obviously. The coaching ticket is in a slightly difficult place at the moment. And then Ulster away to Bordeaux, which just looks like a painful afternoon for Ulster. Ian, those two?
Yeah, I've been disappointed with Connacht. I don't know what's going on there with the quality that they have. Ioane and Blade, I didn't think had good games at the weekend. Ioane in particular, but yeah, I still think they have enough firepower to beat Connacht. I don't think they're going to qualify for Europe through the ORC, so winning the Challenge Cup will be their best route. On Ulster, look, they're up against it. They played Bordeaux in the group stages and Toulouse, and were well beaten. They did have a large number of injuries at the time. They're coming back to full fitness. The likes of Hugh McCluskey, James Hume, Rob Balakoon. I'm not sure if Henderson's going to be fit, but they need to be at full strength. The Ulster will go into this game though believing that they're going to win. Like, they're that kind of side. They've never gone into a match not believing that they're going to win and not having a plan to win. How they do that, like, I think getting after Jalibert is the key. And, the strengths in Biel Barry and Penno, they've got to turn them into weaknesses, get the ball in behind them, force them to make mistakes, frustrate them. But what you cannot do against Bordeaux is overplay and then get turned over, because they're the most devastating side in Europe with that. So, yeah, it's going to need a lot of 9 and 10 out of 10 performances for Ulster. But I think they'll make a contest of it for the first 50 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's signs of life in Ulster. I think that was a big win on Friday night, and I think Jack Murphy is developing into a very fine player, and it's very early in his career, but if he gets the experience of going up against this team, whether it goes well or it goes badly, it will be very beneficial to him. It's pity Ballycoon's picked up another injury because he gives them that extra dimension, and their back three looked very lively last week. And the one thing about Bordeaux, who I think will win and will win well eventually, they don't have the scariest pack as French teams as it comes. So there is a chance that you can go toe to toe with them. But what they do have is the danger, and like they've put 50 points on good teams this season, and Ulster aren't far enough down the line, I think, to go to France and win this one. Same time, they've been flaky in knockouts the last couple of years. Bordeaux, they lost to that Harlequins team last year when it wasn't expected. So I think I'd like to see them give it a good rattle, but I don't see them getting it done. Connacht, look, they're acting like the last two seasons have not been good enough. They're in a bit of flux in that they're redeveloping their stadium, and it will be ready, at some point during next season. They had the ambition as an organisation to take a game to McHale Park, and it paid off in spades. It was a brilliant occasion. It showed that there's an interest and a scope to grow the province and become a real part of Irish rugby. And they've always been a real part of Irish rugby, but not not an equal partner, really. They've always been the poor relation, and it was it should have been a coming of age moment for them because it was such a big crowd in Mayo. So many people came to their first game, and the performance disappointed, they weren't set up. They're not being set up to succeed at the moment because there's so much flux about the way their coaching team is going to be next season. We've got Rod Saib coming in from Australia. We don't know what Pete Wilkins' position will be. It sounds like they're trying to keep him on board, but not in a position in the top as the top dog. He's currently on sick leave, so we wish him all the best. Billy Millard is reported to be coming in, a very experienced campaigner, former Connacht coach himself, but he's been a DOR at Harlequins. I think what Humphreys is doing from an RFU point of view is trying to strengthen the coaching tickets of the three provinces who have lost so much ground on Leinster so that they can close that gap. It seems like that's where the investment is coming, that they've seen a weakness in Connacht and they're going after it by pouring money into the coaching teams. And I think that's smart. I think that's the same with going after the new Munster coach, Clayton McMillan, as well. So, but at the moment, there's so much flux, it's very hard for Connacht to perform, and it's disappointing because they've got so many really talented young Irish players in that squad. Hugh Gavin, Finn Tracy, players of real prominence, potential prominence. Cian Prendergast. You've got players, Darren Murray could make the next step if they're being set up to succeed, but if they're conceding 40 points a game or struggling against 14 men against Munster, they didn't win an Interpro all year. That's a really worrying sign for Connacht. So, they should be able to get it together this weekend, but Cardiff's dangerous. Cardiff, like Connacht, this is their one route to Europe. Same with Cardiff, and Cardiff have a Millennium Stadium final to aim for. So they'll be going after this competition in a big way as well. So they'll have to turn up and they'll have to be better than they have been for the last couple of weeks. And it will be good to get clarity, I think, for everyone on what's going on next season as well.
Okay. Fellas, that is the weekend beautifully set up, I have to say. Looking forward to it even more so now. Thanks to Energia sponsoring our rugby. I've kept you both far too long. Ian Madigan, thank you. Good to have you back on, Ian. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks a million, Joe. Thanks, Rod.
And Rory O'Connor, enjoy South of France.
West of France.
West of France.
Even better. Cheers.
Cheers, fellas.